Are you looking for high-performance data storage that's easy to use yet secure enough for the Department of Defense? Look no further. Racktop Systems gives business software-defined data storage complete with embedded compliance, security, and data encryption. Don't let cyber threats, regulatory demands, or the complexity and growth of your data overwhelm your business. Racktop's high-performance data management platform gives you the tools you need to address the most demanding data challenges. Think beyond storage. To learn more, visit racktopsystems.com. The greatest threat to businesses today isn't the outsider trying to get in. It's the people you trust, the ones who already have the keys, your employees, your contractors, and privileged users. 60% of online attacks are carried out by insiders. To stop these insider threats, you need to see what users are doing before an incident occurs. Observe It combats insider threats by detecting risk activity, investigating in minutes, effectively responding, and stopping data lost. Give it a test drive at observeit.com/Security Weekly. IT Pro TV, binge-worthy learning for IT teams. Why is it binge-worthy? It's learning presented in an engaging and entertaining talk show format that beats voice-over PowerPoint snooze fests. Watch over 3,300 hours of content in their on-demand library on your desktop, on the go, or in the comfort of your own living room. IT Pro TV is IT training you and your team actually want to watch, which means a better return on your learning investment. Get started with IT Pro TV for teams by visiting itpro.tv/Security Weekly and start a 7-day free trial and get 30% off standard or premium IT Pro TV memberships using the code SECWeekly30. Welcome back, everyone, to Enterprise Security Weekly. I'm here with none other than Jeff Mann to talk about RSA. So what do we have to share about RSA for our Enterprise Security Weekly audience, Jeff?
Well, I am happy to give a summary of kind of what I saw, what I did, my thoughts and impressions. If you have questions along the way, feel free to interrupt. I think from an enterprise security perspective, if we're going to be honest, I see the RSA conference this year is kind of struggling. Now, I jumped on Skype at the tail end of your discussion with John Strand, the first part of the show, and John was saying something about Cisco lagging behind yet again, or something to that effect. Didn't really catch the context, but there's hundreds of vendors at the vendor expo at RSA, and there's the big players, the ones that we all know about, the big security companies, and I had conversations with the leadership of quite a few of them. Just to qualify, I was at RSA with a media pass because of Security Weekly, and with that, I had the opportunity to speak with people from various organizations about all the cool new things that they're doing, all that kind of stuff. So I had conversations with some of the big players and people representing some of the from RSA on down. And it was interesting because pretty much all of those companies are, one way or another, they are in a transitional period. They're working on, I was going to say struggling, but let's say working on redefining themselves. Where do they take the company to the next level, or how do they keep the company current and relevant? Take RSA for example. I had a conversation with the president of RSA, and we were talking about, what people know RSA for, which is mostly, and this was myself included, RSA is the conference, and RSA does something with cryptography with those, secure ID tokens, the key fobs. And I asked him, I was like, what exactly does RSA do now? And, he's like, well, that's part of our problem. We're trying to redefine ourselves. We're trying to look to the future. What is RSA moving forward? So, that was RSA. You mentioned Cisco, Microsoft, some of the bigger, smaller players, not the monoliths, but, the RSA, the Rapid7s, the Qualyses, and so on and so forth. All of them seem to be, what's the next big thing?
Yeah.
There's always themes that sort of somehow permeate RSA, and there was Twitter chatter before RSA about what are the big themes going to be, those that were going out there, and there was speculation about how much is AI or machine learning going going to be, one of the buzzwords, and that was probably one of the bigger ones.
Joe,
GDPR to some stuff. Okay, yeah,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead.
I just want to go back to your previous point because it's something that I've been talking about for probably the better part of a year now. I mean, in full disclosure, right, where Security Weekly is more like a marketing agency in various aspects. We trying to tout ourselves now as validation, security market validation, but in working with a lot of organizations, there's a new company that comes into security and they want to be recognized. And I guess at one time I thought that, like once you're a big brand like a Cisco or an RSA or Rapid7, for example, or a Symantec, that, well, everyone knew your brand. So, you didn't really need to do a lot of branding type activities, that was left to the smaller companies that, we talked about one today that we'd never heard of before. What I've come to realize is that, and especially along with your saying, is that as a larger company, either through acquisitions, technology changes, or just trying to keep pace with the market, you changed your messaging and positioning, to use marketing terms, right, in the industry. You have to make people aware of that. So your job of making people aware of your brand, and more specifically what messages you're trying to send to the market and what your position in the market, is a constant activity. And larger companies sometimes, I think, have a tougher job of kind of reinventing themselves and getting the message out there, because now you're stuck. Like when you think Palo Alto, you think next generation firewall. Well, today Palo Alto does a lot more than that. And I think that's why now, because they have larger budgets, right? Publicly traded companies, they're making they have lots of revenue, so they can put a lot of that into RSA and have those bigger booths. Their job, and I don't know how well they did this, should be allowing the attendees and other, everyone at the conference, media, analysts, attendees, other vendors, to realize what their kind of new take on the world is.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. And I would even say even smaller companies that are known for a particular thing. You mentioned Palo Alto. We both worked at Tenable, and Tenable was known for Nessus. But when we were in marketing at Tenable, we were constantly trying to figure out how to get the message across that, oh no, we do a whole lot more than just vulnerability scanning or vulnerability management. And so you can sort of repeat that for many, many of the large or small, the more established companies, the companies that made names for themselves. I guess I'm sympathetic to some degree, and I think you are too, from a marketing perspective, of how you come up with the best way to communicate in very short, catchy phrases that we're doing something different. No, pay attention to us. And I feel for the marketing folks at a lot of these companies, because and I heard it verbalized more than once, and I won't name names or anything, but when the message becomes, and I'm paraphrasing, pay attention to me, we're doing stuff new and different because my job depends on it, is slightly different than we're doing new and different things, and it's really cool, and we're going to really help you, solve your security issues and all the things that you're struggling with, and as we like to say, solve your problems. It's subtle and it's nuanced, and it's always underlying everything that goes on out there. But there was almost a certain air of desperation, or even just sort of there are I don't know. I just got this sense that the atmosphere from the larger companies and more established companies that there is nothing new. We're putting all this spin on what we already do, and we're struggling with coming up a new way. So things that are buzzwords, things that are themes, that are things that we talk about and know about, like the Internet of Things, or industrial
GDPR.
Control systems, or GDPR. They are, and I'm seeing things through my own blinders, my own filters, obviously, but I see much more the messaging as, hey, that's a new thing. Let's throw our solution at it and try to convince people this, we can help them there. Not necessarily understanding what that is all about.
I think we've had this conversation. Certainly, I have with various roles in marketing. Right, is that I never wanted the company that I was working for or representing to be seen or perceived as like the accident jumper. Like,
Right.
GDPR is going to be a train wreck, so we need to jump on that accident, right? Like as it's happening, IoT is a train wreck, so let's jump on that. I don't like what I kind of term as the marketing through tragedy or tragic event, right? That either is something that's a precursor, like, well, GDPR is going to be bad, or this IoT thing was already a train wreck. Like, look at these statistics about vulnerabilities in worms, so it's a train wreck, so therefore we need to jump on it. I think you don't want to lose focus of who your target market is, what problems they have, and how you solve that best. And likely their problem, they may perceive their problem as GDPR now, but really what's their problem? Like above and beyond just what's happening in a train wreck of stuff in the industry or that's related to our industry. Like what problem do people have that you can solve? And how do you find the people that have that problem? And I think that's something that's very difficult to accomplish at a trade show. And sure, you may attribute sales or other activities as and deem it as a success from a trade show, but did you really target those people, or did you just kind of come across them because of a spray and pray because you happened to be at the conference? And could you have really reached those otherwise, maybe for less money?
Right. So a couple different things. To the degree that you have a message that's meaningful or not, RSA is a particular trade show. I always marvel at how anybody expects to be heard, just given the critical mass of everybody in the industry, large and small, old and new, that are all there trying to shout louder and be more creative and having the cooler booth or the cooler extra things at the booth. So that's sort of a continuing thing, and it's true for all trade shows. Given that, you mentioned GDPR, so let's talk about GDPR for a minute. I was actually interested in finding out that, in all the companies that I was talking to, when I mentioned GDPR, probably a good third, if not half of them said, "Oh, we're not even touching that yet." And one or more companies said, "Well, that's a privacy issue. This is a security conference," which I thought was perhaps. I could sort of see what they were saying. And I could also I also sort of felt like they were missing the boat. But there was a consensus that because, to what you were saying about sort of the ambulance chasing, there were a few companies that were trying to jump on the GDPR bandwagon before anything had happened yet. But the majority of them were kind of in a wait and see attitude, because what's not determined yet about GDPR and what's still sort of speculation is what are going to be the impacts from a regulatory perspective. Not so much, the law has been written, it's about to be put in force, but how is that law interpreted, and to what degree are different types of data sets, different types of information about, whether it's construed to be PII or not, how it's stored, how it's transmitted, how it's shared, how it's protected, and who's going to enforce it, and what are the enforcement costs going to be.
Yeah, and what I like about certain vendors is they may be, and I've spoken to one in the I won't name them by name necessarily, but they're in the space of data protection, data discovery, right? And there's a lot of vendors in that space, and clearly you would do that, even take a briefing with them like I have, and you say, well, you must be able to help the GDPR problem. And they're like, well, we've done the analysis and we help with certain aspects, and we have resources available that tell you as a customer or potential customer that we believe we're going to help with these aspects of it from what we understand, and in these other areas we don't help with. I like that transparency from vendors, and that's something to look for as GDPR, I think, will still be a theme throughout the year, is make sure that you look for that. And I think a red flag is vendors that may tout, we can help you with GDPR in just a general sense. It's like, likely you're probably not helping with every single aspect of GDPR, and the ones that are honest about it, I think, are the ones you want to pay attention to.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting because those of us that have been around a while, we can sort of sniff out the difference between
Mm.
they're being very sincere and sort of wait and see versus they're kind of hedging their bets a little bit and being a little bit on the edge, or more blatantly so, trying to get more into the FUD element of
Right.
all these bad things could happen because of GDPR and we could help you. What's and probably what we should be doing as a podcast is trying to help people understand how to identify the differences. So, to summarize, I think the proper stance of most companies right now would be, we're looking at it, we're evaluating it, we're sort of on the sidelines ready to jump in. If things do go a certain way, here's where our products and solutions can help you, but we don't want to oversell it and we don't want to burden you with something that ultimately may not be a big deal or not. If that kind of tone is set versus you need to do something now, we can help you here, we know what's going to happen with GDPR and this is what you need to do to protect yourself, I'd be taking a few steps backwards and looking for the exit.
And
As
so,
quickly as
Jeff,
possible.
you also said that IoT was kind of one of the underlying themes, and there were several vendors in the IoT protection discovery phase. I mean, it's probably all over the map, right?
Yeah, it's so the one aspect of the RSA conference is what they call the Innovation Sandbox, which is a place where they give up and coming startup companies, new technology companies, an opportunity to sort of showcase themselves. And I guess technically they have some sort of preliminary. I don't honestly know how they do it, but who was featured in the sandbox were the 10 finalists for new up and coming companies, and in the area which was in well, it doesn't matter. It was in a separate facility, separate location than the big vendor area of the convention center. So it was a little bit more deliberate. You have to go there specifically to go see the Innovation Sandbox. They had as sort of vendor areas or a way for these companies to show off what they're doing. A focus on both IoT and industrial control systems. And the emphasis being these are areas that are kind of new in terms of technology, not that industrial control systems is. I guess the awareness that, this is something we need to do something about. This is something we should be worrying about. From that perspective, it was kind of new and a focus area. So yes, for IoT, there was a certain amount of awareness demonstrations and communications going on. Hey, we talk about IoT. Here are the bad things that can happen. And I forget the name of the company that was hacked recently because of a fish tank. I don't know if you remember who that was. But that was a topic of conversation, part of the buzz going around, and I think I'm sort of in the same boat to a little bit. When you hear IoT, you initially think consumer devices, and what's that got to do with Enterprise Security Weekly? But the reality is, IoT devices are everywhere, and especially in the enterprise, and to the degree that they're attaching to networks or have the potential to attach to networks, they are very often the Achilles heel, and all the problems that we've been talking about the last couple of years with IoT sort of come to the forefront. What are you going to do about it? So I think a lot of the companies that I saw were focusing on identification and vulnerability discovery, focused on IoT, but also an equal amount of IoT. Caveat: I didn't spend a whole lot of time with those vendors. I don't know that many, if any, were offering solutions necessarily, other than identification, like we were talking about in the previous segment, asset identification. Right. Do you know that this stuff is attached to your network, and do you know how bad that is?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of technology that you acquire today as an enterprise, you may not realize and it depends on how you define an IoT device. I think there's varying levels, right? I think at the at some level, it's a device that connects to your network, but not just connects to your network, also is connecting back up to some central cloud service that's outside of your control and has some kind of mobile app that folks can interact with. And you may think, well, that's really still just consumer devices. But you look at maybe the televisions, the projectors. I mean, even here in the studio, our mixer doesn't have a cloud interface, right? But it connects to the network and it's got a mobile app component to it. So I would put that in some class of IoT device that needs some kind of attention. And gaining visibility into that is very difficult, even as we look into our, in comparison to other companies, I should say, the amount of technology is pretty small. But how do you keep up with all of the updates and security assessments? Sure, Windows, Mac, Linux, that's pretty easy. When you put the applications on top of it, okay, that's a little more challenging, but certainly there are solutions that are available for that. But then how do I go to all of those devices that I may not consider, but are in my value stream? In our case, like the mixer, the video switcher, the HDMI switcher, whatever. How do I make sure that those can conform to the same IT operations practices as the rest of my technology? And I think over time we've seen every device that you purchase today conceivably, has this issue now above and beyond a standard laptop or desktop or even mobile device. So how do enterprises gain insights? And I think that's why it was one of the, the themes this year at RSA and other conferences and just general buzz in our industry about that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I'm a curmudgeon, which means I'm supposed to be highly cynical, but somewhat optimistic still. And what I saw at the RSA conference in respect to IoT, what we've been talking about in other areas, if there was another theme that was emerging, they called it data transformation. And they try to make that sound like it was new and something that people have never thought of before. But as I was hearing people describe it, where I was slightly encouraged, because I've been going around in my talks the last year or so saying, I'm grossly paraphrasing, we as an industry have sort of missed the mark on sort of the fundamental lessons of information security that people like me that came out of the DoD, which is where historically you worry about things like security, take that out into the commercial world, into the private sector, and try to teach and promote these ideas of security. What was very quickly overlooked, and for many reasons, was the idea, goes back to the old movie Sneakers. It's all about the information. So this concept of data transformation, and this was expressed in several different ways, several different buzz themes, slogans, but basically the notion that it's, the business that we're in is not protecting the network anymore, or just protecting the network. It's not just protecting endpoints. It's what is it that has value within your enterprise operation? More times than not, that's data, that's information. And with the acknowledgement that data and information in today's day and age is not just sitting on a mainframe that people have a database user account that they can do queries and do a wildcard search and dump the whole thing down to their laptop and walk it home, which is our recent past. But that data is accessible from laptops, from tablets, from our mobile devices. We're working from home. We're working remotely. We're on the road. It's in the cloud. It's somebody else is storing it. Right. And so on.
Cambridge Analytica has a copy of it.
Yes, exactly. So the idea that, maybe it's not good enough to just protect all the devices that consume or process all of this data, which was sort of what we fell into as an industry was, let's protect the network that exists at an enterprise from the evil internet, because that's where the bad guys are. And as long as we have a good firewall and we have intrusion detection set up, and we've got that crunchy secure shell, so to speak, we can have that soft interior where we're not doing anything. I mean, I saw companies at RSA touting insider threat like that's something new. I'm like, hello, that's thousands of years old. think Trojan horse. Why do we call them, viruses, worms, Trojans? It's because we go back to mythology and ancient Greece. So again, where I'm encouraged is some of these old ideas that people just sort of passed over, I think, in the last 20, 25 years to, just tell me what firewall I need, where to put it, what this, what that, what, all these blinky boxes to put in. People are now getting around to, we have more complex problems to solve, like data. So data transformation, the idea of data portability, the idea that you need to encrypt the data, which is a great idea, and protect it and only allow certain people to access it, and how do you prove that they're authorized to access it? None of these are new ideas.
Nope. But
there are companies out there that are trying to tackle this problem in the context of the new technology landscape that we live in, which again, I'm slightly encouraged and slightly amused that, I've been saying there's nothing new here. We got to go back to the basics. And even though it's being wrapped in sort of new language and people are treating it as if it's something new, it's really, I see a movement going back to, it is all about the data. It is all about the information. We do need to do something to protect that.
Well, yeah, and I also think that some of the other analysis I read about RSA was IT asset management or IT discovery, which I think falls in your classification of like stuff we've been saying for years, Jeff, right? You can't protect what you don't know about, and how do we know about everything? And I think there's been a resurgence of that, and I think a lot of that is these problems have gotten a lot more difficult as you described, right? Because there's cloud and mobile and everything's all over the place, and there's a lot of new ways in which we're working today, but it doesn't change the fundamentals of you got to know about what's on your network. You have to know your data and who has access to it, and that's more challenging today. And some of the new things are, how do we deal with those challenges in today's landscape?
Yeah, and sort of to round out the discussion, the other sort of big theme that there was, and which you've probably read about, was the whole concept of artificial intelligence and machine learning. I cannot think of one exception to companies that were out there basically saying, it's our product that we've had, but now we're doing it with AI, so it's new and improved, and it has the ability to, whether it's threat detection or whether it's malware detection or whatever it is that it's doing, we're a whole lot better now because we're applying machine learning. And I will reserve judgment on whether that's really anything, if there's anything to that ultimately, other than my initial impression is, okay, you're getting wrapped up in the buzzwords and in the latest trends, but it's still the same old product that you've had. Not saying it's not good or doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but the idea that you're wrapping it around machine learning and AI as something completely new and different, I can't speak to the degree that that's true, or they've just latched on to it's making a decision. Let's call it AI. It's always made a decision. That's the nature of whatever the product is.
And that very well just could not even be AI. It's more likely some variant of machine learning and not AI, because those get confused all the time. And I think vendors fall into different categories. They may be using it as a buzzword to generate interest, or it could be something they've been doing for a long time and just they haven't messaged on that particular point, right? But now that it's a buzzword, they want to message on it, and it's all over the map. I think what's kind of frustrating for me is there are vendors doing it very well and applying it very well, and I don't want to see those vendors get lost in the noise. But on the flip side, there are others that are just throwing it out there as a buzzword with nothing really behind it.
Well, and again, going back to this was RSA, huge vendor show. There's a big difference between, you and I, we want to go talk to the engineers, the developers, the chief developers, scientists, the people that actually know how the stuff works. But you have to get past that layer of, and I don't mean this as a disparaging thing, because we all have our place in the world. But when most of the people at the booth are the sales and marketing people that have been coached on what words they should be using and what keywords they should latch they should
Right.
pick up on, so they can take the direction a certain way. I mean, I went to a lot of the crypto booths, and I would start asking crypto questions, and they're like, hold on, let me get our chief scientist, or hold on, there's a physicist over there, he's the guy that knows. So you have to get past that layer, and it's a necessary layer, and I don't mean to disparage that layer, but we know how to navigate past that layer. And the trade show concept, the RSAs, is not necessarily the best place because there's only one or two people, if you're lucky, at any given booth that could really answer the questions that we want to ask.
Right.
But the masses don't know to ask those questions, and if they do ask those questions, they're not asking it to the right person. They don't know how to vet the answer. So there does need to be a way to sort of get beyond that and supersede the sort of compulsory element of, I'm talking to the sales and marketing person that know the spiel but don't necessarily know the depth or the inner workings of what it is that they're talking about, and the nuances of what's good, what's bad, what works, what doesn't, how to apply it to different environments and different situations.
Yeah, and so Michael Santarcangelo and I are working on something to help that, Jeff. Michael's calling it the value prop scorecard. And essentially, we're going to have a version that people will be able to take with them to trade shows or use to evaluate vendors. Is there? I don't see the link in here. There was a link to go get. If you listen to Business Security Weekly, we're talking about it pretty regularly about how to acquire that and when it'll be released, version 1 really soon. And it's based on our experiences in evaluating vendors for a lot of different purposes, and is kind of the culmination of that research. And we're going to give one away for free that you can use to hopefully help with that evaluation, and certainly have your technical questions, but I also believe that everyone at the booth should be able to answer what's on here. And by us kind of standardizing on that, encouraging our listeners to use this value prop scorecard, we're hoping that it entrenches itself into the security vendors as well. So I think that's a good place to close the discussion. Jeff, I wanted to thank you so much for attending RSA and doing some research and briefings with us and coming on the show today. And I think you'll be thankful that you don't have to talk much about your experiences at RSA on the show after this. I think it's good. I think we had a lot of great insights on the RSA conference this year. So Jeff, thank you very much. Thank you for everyone. Thank you to everyone for listening and watching Enterprise Security Weekly. See you next time.